It's really cool to see everybody like entering. Let's give it like a minute for everyone to join. So I think as people are joining, I'm just going to start with a little bit of welcome to the space. So I'm really excited that all of you are here today to join our webinar series. Just a few housekeeping things first. If your mic isn't already muted, if you could mute it, that would be wonderful. We just don't want a bunch of noise coming in and out. As well as if you want your video on, feel free to turn it on. I think that would be amazing. Just one thing is that it is being recorded live. So if you do not feel comfortable sharing your face on a video that's being recorded, that's all right as well, just so that you guys are aware of that. All right, I think I'm gonna wait about a minute for anybody else who hasn't finished joining yet to join before I get started. All right. I think it looks like we're good, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to the webinar series. Today's webinar is going to be about domestic abuse in COVID-19 and how it has affected domestic abuse. I'm Caitlin. I'm coming from Girl Up BC. I'm the research director there, and I'm really excited to be moderating this webinar. I think it's a really important topic that we need to discuss, and I think it's something that has definitely been exacerbated by the pandemic that is going on. First, I do want to acknowledge that I personally am on the unceded territory of the Katzie, Tsawwassen, Coquitlam, Stalo, Kwantlen, Wasanich, and Chaumanas First Nations. I urge you to think about what unceded territories you are living on, you're taking your day-to-day life on, just to remember sort of the land that we have been, that we are guests on. All right, so Girl Up BC is a little, sorry, just an intro about Girl Up BC. We are the BC Coalition for the UN Foundation's Girl Up campaign. We are all about empowering girls to take action and create a better world where women are just as capable and equal as anybody else. Today, on today's topic, we do have a special guest with us here today. This is Angela Marie MacDougall. She is the Executive Director of the Battered Women's Support Services, and I will pass it off to her to share a little bit about her experiences with the organization.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Thank you, and hello everyone with Girl Up all around the world. It is truly a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Fatima, for the opportunity to work together and to sort things out. My name is Angela Marie MacDougall, and I'm here in these unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people in the colonial city known as Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. My people don't come from this land that we're now calling Canada. My ancestors come here by way of the Ashanti people in Western Africa and Ghana, and the Sami people in northern Sweden. And I was born here in Vancouver, and this is the only home I've known. And I've been doing the work to end violence against women and gender-based violence for a long time. I have the extraordinary privilege to do the work with a really great team who's part of Battered Women's Support Services. And I've been in this role as executive director for about 17 years and work with a team of 20 other people that are paid staff and then 150 volunteers. And the organization's been around for 40 years, over 40 years, and exists for the sole purposes of ending gender-based violence and the inequalities that contribute to it. So it's really a pleasure to be here today with all of you as we share together our experiences and also build our strength and hope for a future that's free of violence.
All right, So we're having this webinar today to sort of facilitate a discussion around domestic violence and COVID-19. So I would urge everybody to, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Maria today, ask Angela today, please send them as a private message to me directly, and I will write them down and share them with her, and she will answer them. Or the other option is if you message me privately that you have a question that you want to ask, I can hand you over the floor to ask your question yourself to her. I think that would also be really amazing. Just specify which you would prefer, and we can get started. I think if you have any sorts of comments, thoughts, concerns, questions, feel free to message them to me, as we are here to have a discussion surrounding this topic. And I think that's really an amazing thing. The first thing I did want to talk a little bit about is what does domestic violence look like and what has it looked like? So just a few facts and statistics to give a little bit of, I guess, idea of what domestic violence, how close to home domestic violence really is. So based on my personal research on a bunch of studies, 14.8% of women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. 4% of men will, and an under-researched percentage of non-binary folk will as well. And I think that this idea of domestic violence is one that we as a society sometimes accidentally glaze over. So I think that today, with us having this discussion on it, I think would be a very wonderful way to open this discussion up. So I do have a question to start with to ask Angela. So what originally inspired you to get involved with the Battered Women's Society support services?
Yeah. You know, growing up in the community that I grew up in, my friends often, their mothers were experiencing abuse. It was something that we kind of all knew. There was just a lot. Everybody sort of knew that their mothers were being abused by their fathers. And so as children, we were witnessing that. And that was the case for my mother as well. And it was something that I noticed that a lot of us shared that experience. And I started to become what I like to call politicized about wanting to take action. My formal education is in counseling psychology, and I always wanted to do. I went into that formal education because I wanted to help people heal. I wanted to do therapy, do counseling, help people heal, and then a few things kind of happened that made me recognize that healing was a really important part of the process, but it wasn't going to be enough. It was going to need to be more than that. It wasn't about individuals, that these problems were structural, they were historic, and that they were really baked into society, and in this case, Canadian society. And I know that it's a global experience, and it's around the world. Gender-based violence, gender inequity is a factor in all over the world, and a major contributor to violence. But it was while I was in high school, the killing of a dear friend of mine, Patricia Ann McPherson. She was raped and murdered by a friend, by someone that we knew. And that was a catalyst for me to realize that this was going to have to, wasn't going to be enough, healing wasn't going to be enough. And so I set off on a trajectory around wanting to take action in any way I could, which led me to be an activist around gender-based violence in all of the ways that it exists, including domestic violence. And then also giving birth to my daughter, Leona. That was also, I wanted her to live in a world that was going to be a better world than I lived in. And that meant that I wanted to do everything I could as a mother. And so that involved also, raising her, but it was also about taking action in the broader society. And Battered Women's Support Services became a logical and a kind of an easy trajectory because of the political way that the organization addresses these issues. That on one hand, certainly we're doing support services and helping individuals, but we're also working for institutional and systemic and social change that is actually getting at the roots of the problem. And so helping individuals, but then also building a society where we're taking action on the structural inequities that contribute to violence.
I think that's a really empowering story. Honestly, to me personally. I really resonate with that. And I think it's really amazing how you sort of turn something that you saw as an issue into something that you were very, like into action and something that you're passionate about. And I think it's really cool that you've been working with the Battered Women's Society support services for like so many years. I think it really shows your dedication and how much you really believe in this cause and really want to support it. So the next question I have is, what type of impact have you seen this organization create, especially having been in it for so long?
Yeah, I really like Battered Women Support Services. I like the organization, before I worked here, in part because of what was written into the mission, which is what I said before about the structural problems. That these social problems, I mean, often we think about domestic violence as that it's something that happens with individuals, and it is about individuals, but the individuals are in a context and a social context. And so what became really clear to me, and what I started to do, one of my early roles at Battered Women Support Services was training coordinator. And my role then was to train volunteers in order to answer the crisis line and facilitate support groups. And so the training became this place of political organizing and political understanding. And so I started to look at the role of domestic violence, and how the role of colonization, which is the social structure that we've experienced all around the globe, for a period of about around 100 years. Over 84% of the world's landmass was colonized by a European power, which had a number of different impacts on communities, local communities, bringing ideologies that were based in European ideologies, which were many things, but one of the things for sure was this idea of gender inequity. That Canada, which was colonized by England and France, had very clear ideas about the role of religion and gender inequity, which is to say that women in British common law were considered property, the property of men, the property of fathers, and then through the marriage, the transfer of property to husbands. And this idea of ownership of women within the confines of the marriage, law as a law, what has been baked into Canadian society. So colonization had many factors, and it's in part why we also do this land acknowledgement in terms of recognizing the land, but it also is about social relationships and gender relationships and gender inequities that get baked into society. So that became very important for me in kind of understanding, how did we get here? How did we get here? When we read on the news or hear about a news story, maybe about a woman that's been killed by a man, or maybe by lots of women that have been killed by men, if we're talking about even Turkey right now and thinking about femicides, and the challenge accepted hashtag that we've seen floating around Instagram and other spaces. If we think about that and look at that, it looks like there's these kind of experiences that just pop up here and there and individuals, rather than thinking that this is systemic and historic, and that is these are not one-offs. They're not sort of one instances. They are part of a web of inequity, and that is contribute. So, what I think has been really important for Battered Women Support Services is to bring that kind of analysis into the conversation about gender-based violence generally, but then domestic violence specifically. And so that was new. Nobody was doing that, quite frankly. And so doing that was something that was good and matters. And so we've been having that idea and bringing those ideas into the understanding. And then also what that means in terms of service provision, which is to say that there isn't a universal woman. There isn't one woman. And in a country like Canada, that is diverse, that has a history of colonization, that has a history of enslavement of Africans, that we are stratified as women. So our experiences are different, both in terms of our access to resources and wellness within the society, but also in terms of our marginalization and the isolation that we can feel and experience within the mainstream society in domestic violence relationships. So, Battered Support Services is willing to go there to really understand the roots. And we help individuals all day. I mean, today we had several high-risk cases, one with a lot of lethality, possibility. We had different court cases that, that our team was working on. And those are all individual cases. But the individual women's experiences are layered up with all of this social, historic, and legal context. And this is what we want to disrupt in order to keep to prepare to have a more equitable society, to create a space where girls and women are not experiencing gender violence and domestic violence.
Wow, like I think that speaks for itself, honestly. I think that's really amazing. A question that I've received is, do you have any advice for somebody who is looking to actively help combat this issue?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so there's a bunch of different ways. One of the things that we've been talking about, certainly like with Black Lives Matter, that's emerged with the death of George Floyd, and in the US, and then the activism that's happened around the world. Sorry, with that, one of the things that we've been that's grown out of that is this question about the police and the role of the police, and abolish the police and defund the police, and those kinds of conversations that are happening. So I mentioned that to say that what's come out of that is this idea of community-based responses, that what can we do as a community in order to address social problems. So I don't necessarily want to talk about the police and all of that, but I want to say that the idea of the community-based response is actually a response that is the most effective that we've seen in addressing and redressing violence and relationships. And so I think anybody that's here today from any place around the world, and certainly here in Canada, that is interested, is to know your local community-based organization or entity that's already doing that work, and know who they are, get to know them, and find a way to get involved. See if there's anything that they need. Maybe, just find a way to connect with them, get to know who they are. Now, they might be busy, they might not have limited resources, they may have limited time. Many groups have access to the internet now, so there's some way to interact. It could be through maybe doing a clothing drive. I know that right now with COVID-19, we're all very cautious about that, but there's ways of doing that safely, and there's resources to do that, on the internet about how to do clothing drives safely. Of course, we have to do the PPE and that kind of thing, and there's ways to sort that out. There's also fundraising campaigns in terms of actual tangible dollars that can be done to support your local shelter, your local women's shelter, transition house, rape crisis program. And there's all kinds of organizations around the world that are really underfunded in extraordinary ways, under-resourced, that need that support. And then there's ways of volunteering. I mean, just checking in again with your local organization to see if there's a way to connect. Just about every organization has a volunteer program, and is finding ways to adapt that program under COVID. So that's something to do. And then there's informal and formal education that you can take in order to educate. There's training programs, and maybe we could find a way to connect after, and I could share some links to some online training programs. I know that there's one that we're doing so that people can answer our crisis line, but one of the things that we're in the process of doing is expanding that to provide training to the general population in order to have a 12-week program. It's once a week for 12 weeks, in order to have some skills, or to take those skills and offer support. And then there's helping our friends and our family. I mean, we all know that we know somebody, and if we don't know somebody today, we're going to know somebody soon, because that's how epidemic and how much of an endemic this problem is that we all know somebody, maybe many somebodies, maybe even within our own family, maybe our mother, maybe a relative that's close to us, and maybe even ourselves in terms of a relationship that we're in right now. And so there's actually some resources on our website, BWSS.org. There's a resource called How to Help My Friend. And that resource, it just breaks it down about what you can do for a friend. And so basically what I'm saying is that as individuals, in our relationships, within our community, our school and workplace, and then within the larger society, there's different ways of taking action. And then there's connecting with your elected officials, wherever you are and however the governments are. Get to know the ways that your local government, your maybe kind of regional government, municipal, provincial, state, regional government, and then maybe the national government is taking action or not taking action on gender-based violence, and start to begin to agitate on that level to get more information about what's happening. Maybe do a letter writing campaign, and emails, develop some social media campaigns perhaps. Awareness is really important, and we're still wanting lots of awareness. And then it's also about change, the social change. We want change to happen. So the more hands that we have there doing that work, the better we are to continue the groundswell that is the social change that we all seek. And each and every one of you have a role in that. And with the internet and with Zoom, our opportunities have actually expanded, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think there are so many ways to help out in the community, both monetary and non-monetary. Just for everybody who's in the call, if you didn't know where to find a lot of the resources that Angela's talking about, you can access, I would say, a lot of information on the Battered Women's Support Services website. If you plug that into Google, it should be the first thing that comes up. So just so everybody is aware of that, it's a very helpful resource when talking about domestic violence as well as gender-based violence. But speaking about like helping out friends and people in situations that have gender-based violence or domestic abuse, to what limit can we help out as individuals, and at which point should we acknowledge that we need to refer them to a professional?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So there's a lot that we can do as an individual, actually. There's a lot that we can do. I mean, most of the time, when somebody's experiencing domestic violence, experiencing intimate partner violence, it is their friends that they're going to tell first. And that, and reach out. And maybe even, if in social settings, I know things have changed under COVID, so we're not having too many social settings anymore. But we may have seen something that's inappropriate, or we know that somebody has been inappropriate. And so one of the things that we can do is to listen and be supportive, and to believe and to not blame. Victim blaming is something that is so prevalent all the time. And it can get complicated, especially in social settings, or it feels complicated in social settings, especially if we know the parties, if we know the people, and maybe we've known the abusive person longer than that we've known the victim, maybe. And so we have some alliances and some allegiances because of that, those relationships, or maybe it's a family member or whatever, like the complications of relationships. So there's all kinds of things that can make it easy for us to disbelieve or to minimize or to blame the victim. And so that's something that we just need to unpack for ourselves as individuals, and then to provide to listen and to act as a support. There's so much that we can do just to listen, and then to help a victim strategize, help a young woman strategize what her options are. And that is then bringing in other resources. Again, if you check out that handout that we have on our website, How to Help a Friend, it goes through a whole range of things. And one of the first things is to help her make a safety plan. If there's been physical abuse or sexual abuse, which happens a lot, then helping to make a safety plan is really a really important thing. And that is talking with her about things that she can do to be safer, and to even, end the relationship that could involve ending the relationship. Now, one of the struggles that we have as friends and family in supporting others is that sometimes we might see the pathway to safety clearer and faster maybe than what the victim is or what the young woman is feeling. And that's because for any of us that have been in an abusive relationship, we know that it's just not about the abuse. It's also about the companionship and the love and the connection, and even the understanding and those complications. And so for so many of us that may find ourselves in an abusive relationship, we don't want the relationship necessarily to end, but we want the abuse to stop. And so that's the part that gets a little bit tricky, because it takes a while sometimes to understand that we don't get the relationship without the abuse, that they go hand in hand. And it's that journey of kind of figuring that out. And so all too often we will give a lot of space for the abusive partner, at our own expense. And so that comes also from our social learning. I always say this, and this is it's really just kind of how we're socialized as girls, as women, and certainly for non-binary folks to a point, is this idea of being relational, like to really care about relationships and to prioritize relationships over ourselves, like to put that ahead of ourselves. And so on one hand, that's actually something that's really good about, what I think for girls and women is that we are relational. So we're the glue that holds the family together, in a sense, the community together. We convene the gatherings and the social settings, but it's also our liability in an abusive relationship, because we will take a lot of abuse, and each time we experience abuse, we then a part of ourselves, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. We get beat down psychically, emotionally, energetically, and so we begin to lose more and more of ourselves, and that gets hard to escape that over time. So as a friend, what we can do is to be a friend and to be there and to say, I'm with you, I will support you, you don't deserve this, you deserve better, I want to help you get support. And it'll be, depending on the relationship, it'll become clear when you want to bring other people in. One of the main factors of domestic violence is isolation. Abusive partner will do all kinds of things to isolate a young woman, from friends and family and from support. So what we can do then is that we can help increase her support by helping her connect with others. And that means other support services, including ourselves. We just need a team. We need a team to assist us when we're experiencing abuse.
So earlier you talked a little bit, okay, first of all, I think that's a lot of knowledge. Excuse the traffic behind me if anyone hears it. I just live right next to a really big road. But I think personally, I never realized how much we can do as individuals. So I think it's really amazing to see that there actually is something that we can do as people to fight this sort of injustice. Earlier you had mentioned this idea of education, and one of the questions I received was, how have you seen sexual education in classrooms combating this idea of domestic abuse, and why is it still such a taboo subject?
Great question. I mean, they're all great questions, and this is a good question in terms of how the schools maybe hindering maybe a little bit. People are people are scared to talk about relationships and to talk about social problems and talk about domestic violence and to talk about sex. It continues to be so much stigma associated with all of that. And what we did for a long time, we were doing a lot of work with high schools in this part of the world, and really working primarily with students that were in grade 11 and 12. It's not too many teachers were willing to talk about relationship violence or dating violence under grade 11 and 12. There's a lot of maybe fear about doing that. And, you know, this comes down to adults really underestimating youth, quite frankly, and really underestimating how much young people know, how much they've already figured out, how much they're already observing, how much knowledge they already have, how many relationships they're already in, how much sex they're already having, all that kind of stuff. And so this is, you know, just another way that adults, you know, don't kind of miss the boat. Like, or they're just so scared maybe, and maybe want to protect. But in the protecting of young people, and it's not protecting. The thing about knowledge is strength, and knowledge is key, and knowledge is liberation, and education is power. That includes relationships, and just the facts about domestic violence, and the facts about sexuality, and about power imbalances in relationships. So this comes down to adults being uncomfortable with, even though adults have gone through that themselves, there's unwillingness to recognize that and maybe that's part of it, is just not wanting to admit all that. So, I think that as young people that have access to the internet, and this comment here about keeping them from those conversations makes us more vulnerable. Absolutely. Which of course is probably not what adults want, most likely, but that's what it is. It's kind of like if we stick our head in the sand, and if we don't talk about it, somehow it doesn't exist, which is not the case. So what you have the benefit of is the internet, which has democratized education. It's democratized, access to information. So, and also really, in so many ways, taken adults out of the equation, in which, in terms of being the gatekeepers for information that you need for life. And so I would look again, your local women's organization, your local anti-violence organization, community-based organization is a place to get that information. It's a place to connect and to engage. And then the internet. I mean, we have all kinds of stuff about dating violence for young people, and about dating violence, and about healthy relationships, and navigating power dynamics in relationships, and so there's lots of things to read. Google remains our friend, and there's quite a bit there to access, and so that's the best part about the 21st century, and and Gen Xers, and and millennials, in terms of having that access. So congratulations for being raised and born in this particular time where you've got all the information right at your fingertips.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Oh my gosh, Google is such a big access to be able to find so much information. It's all literally right there. So yeah, I think I would also urge everyone to, even after this webinar, if there are things and ideas that really stuck out to you, just give it a quick Google search, do a read up on it. I think we learn a lot from just spending a little bit of time learning more about I guess the society and the injustices that people face. So earlier I had a comment that was asking if you could talk a little bit more about the idea of how colonization and colonialism has sort of brought patriarchy into our society today, in what used to be a more equal society.
Yes, I love talking. It's been rendered invisible. The role of colonization has been rendered invisible, and in terms of really being such a force in shaping societies all around the world. And so the thing that, and people kind of struggle with this, because in kind of identifying, Europe as the source of the ideologies that have been around the world, it's this kind of, we really struggle with this idea, because we have to talk about race then, and racism, and people kind of struggle with that. It's kind of, nobody wants to do that, maybe increasingly so, but still not really. And so it is a factor in terms of certainly a country like Canada that is been colonized by England and France, but clearly has folks from other parts of the world, including Indigenous people. But one of the main things that that colonization did was to bring European values. the main thing, and the values in terms of commerce, economies, governance, electoral systems, gender relations, at religion, and a whole host of other stuff. And so in that was the idea of patriarchy. And patriarchy is just quite simply the ideology and the practice of centering men and male assigned people with as the power structure, and as being superior to other genders, including women. And so that's patriarchy. And Canada as a country is a patriarchal country. There really isn't any other country in the world there's no country in the world that hasn't been informed by patriarchal ideas and doesn't have a patriarchal kind of lineage and practices. And so it's even to the point where we're talking about, like I mentioned before, marriage, and this idea of like in a heterosexual relationship where a woman takes a man's surname, his last name. And every once in a while at Battered Support Services, we get donations, and less so now because I think, less so now because people are kind of older and so are passing on. But we used to get donations from women that, in this really old cursive writing that we don't see anymore, like the handwriting on checks. And it was lovely to get the donation. It would be signed Mrs. John Robinson, like literally with Mrs. with his name and his last name. She had no identity at all. No identity, just, and this is Canada, and it's a recent time, like it's within, I've seen those checks like not too long ago. So this idea of like the patriarchal values have been baked in. Now the colonization, it's not to say that societies were this idyllic kind of places around the world prior. Humans, keep on being humans wherever we are. And so there's all kinds of things to say about humans prior to colonization. And so this isn't to idealize that, but what I will say is that what we know is that early human societies, growing up to more recent times prior to colonization, were matrilineal, which is to say that there was a kinship of women and it was a kind of a recognition of the role of child rearing and caring for children. And then in many cases, if there was a marriage, which marriage is a colonial concept, but this idea of relationships and connecting, that the man would come into her family, like her community, her family. And because we have such patriarchal ideas, we can't even really imagine anything other than a hierarchical point of view. But matrilineal was a bit more of a circle. And there are many communities around the world that had this idea, including places here in Canada. And even, up north here in the north and the west, north coast, Indigenous nations have matrilineal, they'll tell you, and, the matriarchs and the roles of matriarchs. And so the kinship was the man would come into the community, and it made sense because if things happened in the relationship, he would leave, but the children would still be protected and and cared for, and there would still be the grandmothers and aunties and all of that would still be there. And so in patriarchal societies, what we end up having through kind of contemporary marriage rights is where we're all kind of looking for this white picket man into a house surrounded by a white fence, and that's now a family. And she's so isolated from community, from relatives, from aunts, uncles, from sisters. And so if there's problems, and oftentimes she's isolated from that family because she's kind of in his family, that it just creates this whole level of subjugation. Patriarchy hasn't been good for women. It hasn't been good for women. Just the notion, it just hasn't. It is a version of subjugation. And it's something that we want to disrupt, and something that I think is being disrupted increasingly as we're even challenging genders. The notion of a binary is that we're really challenging the idea of gender binary, which is to confront patriarchy at the core. because patriarchy wants that binary in order to subjugate. It's kind of like, we used to talk about, as old school feminists used to talk about, is it a boy or a girl? Why do you want to know? Because you want to oppress? Like, what's the reason for knowing that? And so these are the things that we're, as a society, that we're taking action on in beautiful ways today.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a lot more wonderful now that like society is starting to recognize sort of how these very small and covert, I guess, actions sort of can be very oppressing to women, to non-binary folks, to a various different amount of people. Yeah, so many things. So a different question that was asked, have domestic violence shelters been affected by COVID-19? And in what way? Like, are they shutting down? Are they overflowing? And how would this problem be able to be solved or mitigated?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was just looking at a report that the province of British Columbia did around looking at the impact of gender-based violence and COVID-19. Yeah, so transition houses and shelters have been created, residential spaces for victims, victims to come with their children. And so if you can imagine, right, like the early part of COVID-19, certainly here in it's just this part of the world, that kind of hit in March and continued up until today, that the social distancing requirements means that communal living, which is what the shelters are, have to be changed just fundamentally. You can't have as many people in the space, and those people that are in the space have to then be contained in some way, and and to kind of figure out how they're going to be in the space, or the shared spaces like bathrooms and showers and kitchens and that kind of thing. So most of all the transition houses that we've seen here in in BC, they had to scale back their services extraordinarily in order to manage the social distancing and the social isolation requirements that we had in the early part, and then now. And so initially there was some lag time where that was just getting figured out. And what ended up happening was then, in addition to the transition houses that, let's say, could have maybe, let's say, 20 people or maybe 10 people, now can only have like 3 or maybe 8 people, including children. So then what they did is they opened up hotels. There was funding that came from the provincial government, so hotels became available. They paid for rooms, and so that allowed for some kind of additional spaces for women and for their children and during that time. And so we're still just figuring all that out. I mean, BWSS isn't a shelter. We happen to have a hotel. We did that kind of separately. We got a hotel. We had a private hotel owner. We reached out to them and they said yes, and they gave us a whole floor. It's actually a really beautiful hotel. Like if you're going to come to Vancouver as a tourist, you'd want to stay at this hotel because it's just so gorgeous. So it's a great place to be if you've left an abusive relationship. It's kind of a bit of a retreat in that sense. It's lovely. And so we do have a hotel. We're not a residential service. We do support and other things. But we've been, of course, paying really close attention to the ways in which shelters are impacted by COVID, and it's profound. I mean, we're in a whole new world now and trying to figure out what we're going to do with this virus and how we're going to ensure safety and services.
Yeah. Let me know if the statistic is correct, but I read, I think it was on your guys' website, that calls.
It's probably correct then.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. But I don't know if I'm quoting it correctly, so I just want to make sure I'm saying the right information. But that you guys have seen like a 400% increase in like calls to this like crisis hotlines.
Yeah, so we did. We certainly did initially. The first until the end of June, we saw a massive increase in requests for services. And what it was that our crisis line up until then was open during the day, during the week. We didn't have a 24-hour line for a whole bunch of reasons. We didn't have a 24-hour line. And there are other resources that were available for 24-hour. But we went to 24-hour because when COVID hit in the middle of March, the social panic was so major, and everybody got very focused, legitimately, everyone got very focused on their own safety and security for their families, themselves. And so many organizations that deliver services kind of stuttered for a time there in terms of service delivery, because we had some gaps. We had some gaps and for a time. And we took action right away. Like, we ended up not having a gap. We turned our crisis line into a 24-hour crisis line in a day. And we started to embark on social media and media campaigns to get the word out. And so what that did is that the calls came in. Like, we had 1,800 calls in March, that's a lot of calls. Let me tell you, it's a lot of calls. And we had a little bit less than that in April, May, and then in June. But those calls were massive, in part because of the media and social media that we did. And so we were getting lots of calls, and that was good. We consider that a very good thing, because we wanted anybody that was concerned about themselves in terms of safety, or their friends or family, to know where the resources are. This is my cat. It's dinner time over here at Angela's house, so he's he's getting in the way, reminding me it's dinner time. So we really wanted to be sure that anybody that was concerned about themselves or their safety, that they, that there were resources. And so the numbers went up, and we're glad for that. We think that's a good thing, because we know that the numbers went down every place else, but they stayed up for us and high, because we made it really accessible for people to access us. And it took some time for organizations to figure out like where the resources were, how to access them. And some places, actually, people closed down. Like, you would get a voicemail, like you couldn't reach. So we're happy to have played a role here in British Columbia to help, fill a need for a portion of time while organizations were trying to figure stuff out.
I think that's really cool. I think that's amazing that you were able to sort of like provide those services when like such a big shift happened like in our world. One of the other questions that was sort of asked, well, not sort of, that was asked.
My cat unplugged my laptop. I'm gonna bend over, but I'm listening.
Okay, perfect. How have the law and the police fallen short in protecting women when it comes to domestic violence cases that have been reported?
Such a big question. I've on the police recently for lots of reasons. I mean, and I think that's fine. This is going to be hard on them. So we have a complicated relationship with the police, as trying to address gender-based violence, because, as an example, one of the calls we got today, high lethality case, very serious case, and we involve the police. We don't tend to call police, like, we don't call the police, very rarely. In this case, we did, and I've said very rarely, like, it's almost never. I can count on one hand all the times that we've done that in the last 10 years. And we did call the police in order for them to attend a house with the woman, because we were really quite concerned, and we know the lethality factor, and he was there, so we managed to get the police there, and they got him out of the house, and that was good. I mean, the reality is that domestic violence in its worst case scenario ends in death, and that's one of the things that we have noticed here in Canada, that we did have a spike in lethality. Like, there were a period of time where there were statistically more women killed by male partners here in Canada, and that's real. Like that is an outcome of domestic violence. And so we did involve the police today in a very rare case, and for us, rare case in terms of us calling them. The police, they can do a good job, and they can also do a really bad job. And when they do a bad job, it's really bad. So that's what we struggle with, honestly, is holding the police accountable. So much of our job is holding them accountable to follow through on their policies and their practices. And we don't have right now a community-based response. We don't have, for instance, we don't have anybody else to call like today to go and get this guy out of the house. We don't have another option. So, and we also want to be able to hold abusive partners accountable. And we don't have another way of doing that yet within our society. There isn't another justice or legal frame. So we work with the police and we hold them accountable, and we file complaints. A lot of our job involves holding them accountable, doing complaints, calling their supervisors, writing, terse emails. And then I spend a lot of time in the media criticizing them anytime I can. They're the agency that's supposed to be about public safety, and domestic violence victims is one of their, it's one of the things that they tout as, what they're protecting. So if that's the case, then, we expect a really good job consistently. And we don't get that consistently. And so we do that. It's part of our work.
You had mentioned we don't yet have another community response that can sort of help to fill this gap that the police doesn't provide. I guess from your experience, what sort of institution, entity would be the best to fill that gap?
So this is what we're trying to figure out right now, honestly. As living in a patriarchal society in Canada, it's hard to build a community-based response that isn't also going to entrench patriarchal, problematic patriarchal, stuff. And the police are a big extension of patriarchal ideas, and that's why we can also. But there also is some semblance of oversight, so we can, and protocols that we can hold them accountable for that. A community-based response is a bit more complicated because it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get a good response, because people still struggle with domestic violence and still victim blame, still want to give excuses, to the offender, still want it's a bit more of a complicated thing in terms of community-based. But what is working really, really well, and that's organizations like the one I work for. And there's, about 500 versions of this organization across Canada, doing different kinds of things to support victim survivors. And so that's something that is working. We know that we have not been able to track an instance where a woman has been connected to an organization like ours and who has been killed. We haven't been able to track that. It's, from our knowledge, that hasn't happened. So what we want to do is to ensure that organizations like the one I work for, and it's not just because I work for it, but it's because I know we do great work and see the effects, is that we want to ensure that organizations like ours are resourced really well in order to be able to respond. We do safety plans, we support women and their children, we help build a sense of accountability within the community. And so women's organizations, rape crisis centers, domestic violence services, transition houses, shelters are really good investment, really good resources, community-based response to addressing this problem.
I think that's really amazing. I think it's really cool to see, I guess, sort of the difficulties in trying to create a community response, but also how fulfilling it can be. Another question that I received earlier is, If you notice an instance where somebody is experiencing domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and you converse with this person about the situation, but they aren't willing to get help or they don't see the issue, how do you go about navigating that situation?
Happens all the time, 100%. I mean, so help is relative. The fact that that person has talked to you, that's help. So that's a really great first step, a very important step, usually a major step. And so that resource that I talked about before that's on our website, How to Help a Friend, goes through lots of things that people can do just with your friend. And so that, and you know, and that's really important to kind of offer that support in that way. Help can also be the internet. Uh, you know, there's a lot of resources for victims of violence when you've been experienced violence in order to help how to heal, things to do. Of course, it's always better, like it can be better to connect with a support person that's trained. There's lots of things that people can do on their own, at least initially. But the main thing to keep in mind is that this journey is very personal, and it always takes longer than we think it's going to take. And so that's the part about with a friend or a family member or like a colleague, a schoolmate, is to try and have patience and to take some time and allow the person to move at their own pace and know that they're doing the best that they can. And that, but also to recognize that you have to, if you're feeling frustrated or have your own maybe judgments, to take a break yourself as well, because sometimes it's just kind of hard to be kind of helping somebody. But the main thing to know is that just because somebody doesn't appear to be doing anything about it, that's not necessarily accurate. People are taking their own time, grappling with it and figuring stuff out. We just have to trust that with the support of a good friend and being able to listen, resources that are available on the internet, and then to connect with the crisis line, you know, like Battered Support Services or others that are in the U.S., that are in other parts of the world, and that can go a long way to assist somebody.
In talking about people who are experiencing situations like this, as individuals, how can we better equip ourselves to like notice the signs of intimate partner violence or gender-based violence, and how can we notice them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First thing is to trust your instincts, trust your gut. So if something doesn't feel right, you know, maybe that's something to check out. And you know, talk with a friend and talk it through. That's really important. You know, we're socialized, and this even goes back to what we talked about before in terms of the, you know, not adults not wanting to give youth information and stuff. Is that we're socialized from such an early age to not trust our instincts, to not kind of trust it, and to look for others or to doubt ourselves and to question ourselves and that kind of thing. So, but you know, we as a species, the human species, has been giving, you know, all kinds of alert, you know, signals that, you know, that are there. We have our spidey senses that have been socialized in us because, after all, we're just another species, just like the cat and the dog, and you know, so we've got this kind of alert system that's already there in us. And so one of the things that we can do is to trust our gut feeling. First, begin to notice that we have a gut feeling, and then to trust it. And so one of the things that we can often do is that we have a feeling, and then we start to question it and discount it as, oh, I'm overreacting, it's not that bad, you know, and we start to make excuses. And so that, if that's the case, just notice that we've done that we've started to not trust ourselves, and we're just kind of, that's just part of the process, just say, oh, maybe. And then that's something that we can talk with a friend about and to kind of check out a perception. At the end of the day, you know, that we have there's a lot of opportunity for us to act in our own best interest, just from the point of view of trusting our instincts. Oh, there's a couple memes that are floating around where it's like, I'm trying to remember the exact wording. It's like, I don't know, your gut feeling, I told you so. It's like the information's there and we get it, we have to trust it. We can check it out again by talking with a crisis line, a colleague, a crisis line, a friend or a family. This happened. I'm not sure if it's bad or good. I know I didn't feel good about it. I just want to check it out. And so that's a way to begin kind of unraveling what the situation is. There's some things that are so obvious and clear that we still may even question, like physical abuse, like getting hit or slapped or punched or pushed or pinched. Those things are so obvious, but sometimes we even discount that because we're maybe, again, second guessing ourselves or, kind of thinking that through. Other things are more harder to kind of figure out, like gaslighting, emotional abuse, kind of undermining. And so those are things that are a little more complicated, and sometimes we maybe have a reaction to it, but we're doubting ourselves. So checking with a friend, checking with a crisis line, reading, writing. And I'll tell you what, 99.9% of the time, our gut instinct was right. And the question for us is whether we're going to listen to it.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are a lot of signs that we discount, mainly because I think we don't want to believe that it's true a lot of the time. And we sort of like justify things that clearly should not be justified. Um, Earlier, we were talking a little bit about like how do we bring these ideas up to like friends and families, and how do we take action in these situations. So one of the questions related to this topic is how do you actually bring up an idea as societally taboo as like domestic violence, gender-based violence in a more like traditional community? And I assume that this person meant in like a culturally traditional community.
It's tough. It's really tough. I mean, that's I guess it depends on what the reason to bring it up for. Like if there's somebody that maybe that you're concerned about, then if that's the case, then it's better to talk with that person and see how they want to proceed, because their safety would be a factor in that. Wouldn't want to like out them in a scenario which then could backfire and cause more harm. So checking with that individual about what they want and what's what they need and how to do that. If it's about having general conversations, um, it's always, I think it's good to just say, listen, I know that we're raised in different generations. We have different ideas about these things. In my generation, we talk about this stuff, and maybe can we and we have this perception of it. What has been your experience of it? And I know and I'm concerned that maybe what has been taught before isn't translating now, because we have more information, we want more equity, and we think that more equity is a good thing. So this is just, these kind of generational conversations are things that that I think that we're having, and there's certainly more interest in that. You have to check your own safety as well, whether it's going to be safe to have that conversation. If you think that you could be subject to any kind of violence or abuse as a result of raising that's something to really trust your gut on. Sometimes these traditional ideas, they don't want to be challenged or questioned. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. And so in that, there could be harm there. So try, kind of assess what your own safety level is, and maybe, maybe figure out who within the family community would be the most maybe open to have that conversation and to figure out the way to do that. This is a time right now around the world where, if we're talking about domestic violence, this has been the first time actually in the long time that I've been doing this work and concerned about these problems, that we've had this much interest in domestic violence, and it's been a progressive thing that started with hashtags in terms of sexual violence. report, raped and report, that all of the hashtags that we've seen related to sexual violence. But domestic violence, this is the first time that we've had such a massive interest in it. So no doubt the community, however traditional, has kind of been sensitized to that on some level. And so using examples can be helpful as well, in terms of maybe even noticing if something happened in the community, if there's a media report, can help bring, help maybe be a catalyst to begin the conversation or continue the conversation. I guess at the end of the day, it's about thinking about what your reasons are for that. If it's about trying to change the kind of some of the cultural, problematic cultural ideas within the family or community, then you're going to want allies and people within, within the community, within the family that could be with you along the way. So I would look for those folks that would be most willing to support these ideas and to, to help move that forward. Change is happening, and there's no escaping it. We're not, the change is underway. We're not going back to anything more regressive in terms of social and gender relations. It's not going to happen.
For sure. And I think like something to think about is that like change starts with us, right? Like those of us in this call right now that we're learning more and understanding more about gender-based violence and domestic violence. I know personally for me, like I am learning so much. And if I didn't have a hand, I think in helping to facilitate this event, I don't think I ever would have learned so much about domestic violence and gender-based violence and how prevalent it is in like the community that I live in. So I think it's a really exciting idea that more people are learning more about these injustices. So a different question that I had received is, if you know the aggressor or the abuser of the victim, is it safe? And should you, and if you can, how should you approach confronting this aggressor or abuser?
Yes, tricky. So it depends on your relationship with the person. If it's your brother, you might be able to do it differently than if it was, a neighbor or something. Your safety is paramount. So what you don't want is to, you got to be really careful about that. And confronting is tricky. You got to kind of, assess what your relationship is with that person, and then assess your own safety and how much you're going to be able to have that conversation. Sometimes we can have these conversations with family members and they will agree, maybe kind of struggle with, yeah, I know, and I need help, or, there's all kinds of ways in which people can kind of figure that, kind of go with that way. But the main thing is to kind of understand what your safety is, and finding a time to talk about it when it's safe for you. And that again goes to what your personal relationship is with that person, and then also trusting your instincts on that. And then if you think it's safe, then figuring out what is the mechanism you're going to use. Is it going to be the telephone? Is it going to be is it going to be a text? Is it going to be, what is the way? A message? What is the way that you're going to talk to them? And then from there, think about that in terms of your word. If it's wording, kind of plan out what you're going to say. Now, what I've seen is that effective is to say, listen, I'm worried about you. I think that you've done these things, and I think that's really troubling. And I don't, there's something going on for you that you would do that. And of course, I'm worried about the victim, and name the person if you know that person. And, and they don't deserve to be treated like that. And so you need to stop. And that's kind of some basic things to say to that individual. I'm worried about you because you're, depending on your relationship with them. So if like it's your brother, let's say, or an uncle or something, I'm worried about you because I know you're doing this and we're family. But it needs, and I'm worried about, and name the person because I know you're doing this. And it needs to stop. It needs to stop. And those are the very 3 lines that you could say. And so you have to stop doing what you're doing. So after you've figured out your own safety, those are 3, 4 lines to say, and then to go from there.
Yeah, it's really valuable insight. Yeah, I never would have thought like, or I mean, it makes sense to sort of bring it up in a sort more personal level rather than being super confrontational about it. A different question that I received is, could you expand a little bit more on the idea of if there is a link between dismantling the patriarchy and helping to end instances of domestic and gender-based violence?
Right. So here's the thing. You know, humans can be mean to humans. We can do all kinds of really bad stuff to humans. We certainly do it, you know, cross genders, you know, all the stuff that we can do that's really vile behavior between each other. That's the thing. And that's the part about, you know, how humans can be really bad. What's different about what we're talking about is this power imbalance that's been baked into society, that is about where men have more power, more privilege, more power, more ability to access and to, you know, in terms of you know, in the society, and a more a sense of entitlement within relationships that has been socialized. And so this is the thing that is a profound difference in just what is a bad relationship. And those power imbalances are what we want to level. We want to reduce the inequity that's a power imbalance, and to kind of, you know, bring more equity in relationships. And so, you know, years ago, I used to do work with men that were court mandated for what was then called batterers treatment. And I did groups with, you know, groups. And one of the things that the men couldn't wrap their head around is this idea of an equal relationship. They could not imagine that, because somebody always had to be the boss. It was just a fundamental part of their relationship. And so part of what, you know, what I think that has been taught by patriarchy is this idea that somebody's the boss. Somebody's always the boss. And then that gets translated into a relationship. And that is the major contributing factor, is that somebody has to be the boss. And so any action that the woman takes or the victim takes in order to bring a level of equity in the relationship, the abusive partner perceives as the victim as trying to be the boss. That's a fundamental feature of domestic violence.
That's crazy. That's really, I think, vital information, because personally, like, I have never thought of it that way. Like, you hear phrases like who wears the pants in the relationship, like, all the time, and it's such a normalized idea, I think, in our society. Just crazy. Since we have been talking, I think, a lot about this idea of domestic violence and ways in which it's being, I guess, fought and opposed, in an ideal world, in what ways could, or what strategies could be used to completely end domestic violence?
Yeah. So strategies. Well, I mean, we're doing it. I mean, tonight's a night. The strategy. It's just we're big strategy right here to have this conversation and to talk together and to build a community of across the globe that, you know, is of caring people and that are taking action in various ways. So education is one of the ways. Awareness is really important. Behavior change, you know, and services are really important. And I just noticed in the chat, one of the participants asked a question about what's men's role? What's men's role in this? And men have a role. Men have a role. Men and boys have a role. And they've been the kind of least kind of involved for all kinds of reasons. And somebody pointed out earlier, still, when we were talking about patriarchy and not being good for women, and somebody said, well, it's not always good for men either. And so that is true. It's so true. In terms of, you know, with the term toxic masculinity, which is the idea of being beholden to a virulent version of patriarchal ideas, which are designed to subjugate. So, you know, men's roles continues to be about educating themselves and others on gender relationships and looking at power and divesting from toxic masculinity and divesting from, you know, hierarchical relationships, you know, in terms of gender relationships. And one of the things that we've seen increasingly, and there's some great men out there, and I encourage you to find them on the internet. One is a man. He's in he's based in an organization called Connect New York, and he's in New York City, Harlem. He's an African American man. He does incredible work, and his name is Quentin Walcott. I'll just write his name in the chat. I encourage you to check him out. I'm not going to do capitals because, and then there's another man that is amazing. And did you get that one? Did Quentin Walcott show up? Oh, I think I sent it privately, sorry. So there's Quentin Walcott. Oh, I sent his name on. And then there's another man that you should check out. And his name, he's another African-American man that's done incredible work in the US. And his name is Byron Hurt. And he's written he's done a beautiful film called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. Amazing stuff. There's another guy who, just in terms of men, that he's kind of the guy. He's done so much work. His name is Jackson Katz, and his name is there. And then finally, I kind of call him the granddaddy of men, engagement of men. And that's, oh shoot, oh no, I'm gonna forget his name now. Paul Kittle. And he wrote a book way back called Men's Work. And it was just looking at men divesting from patriarchal ideas, divesting from, you know, toxic masculinity. Though we weren't saying, you know, toxic masculinity wasn't really a term back then. But those guys, Quentin Walcott, Byron Hurt, Jackson Katz, and Paul Kittle will oh, I'm gonna, there's another guy too. If you're in Canada, you might know this group, or maybe around the world, called A Tribe Called Red. They're Indigenous MCs. So one of the guys is DJ Indian, and he, check him out. He's actually doing a lot of stuff right now on addressing male violence and toxic masculinity. So there are men that are doing stuff, and they're great guys. Those guys are great. You will look up their stuff.
Oh my gosh, so many amazing names to search up after. I'm going to do like a big research after this. I think that's really cool and more information for us. But speaking of this idea of like how we can combat domestic violence, we're not in an ideal world, sadly. So one of the questions that I received is, how do we fight this sort of injustice and feel as though that there is success and expect success when the system itself is the thing that is broken?
Yes. So, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, and the fact that we have tonight with this great group of everyone here from around the world, you know, under the banner, you know, under this banner, you know, Girl Up, is a beautiful thing. Like that is about the change. So, you know, of course we want change tomorrow, but really, we've only started addressing domestic violence and gender-based violence really 40 years ago. So it's been so new, you know, it's only a recent history that we've been doing this, but we've covered a lot of ground already. Like, it's not enough because of course we haven't seen the changes entirely, but we're talking about something where the roots are so deep, so deep. Oh yeah, so Matt McGorry, yeah, that's the actor, right, with Riverside. I think. Is that the guy? Yeah, I'm following him on Instagram. He's great. So that's another name there for Matt McGorry. Don't just do not lose patience. Be patient. Uh, keep a fire in your belly. This is about our lives. We're fighting for our lives and for the future generations. And know that right now, the Gen Zs and millennials are leading the way on in so many ways. And so that, I mean, in so many ways, you've got the tools and the analysis and the opportunities to continue the work that's been happening for 40 years and to advance it in ways that we never thought would be possible, because of course you're going to do it your way. And so this is just keep going, keep educating, keep the fire in your belly. Know that you can't do it alone. You can keep a strong community around you, and believe in yourself as individuals, and believe in yourself as a community. In this case, the Girl Up community is a powerful voice for social change, and you're doing amazing stuff.
Yeah, I think this is a great reminder that small change is still change. And it's this big idea, like if you think about like the ripple effect, one action, even if it's small, can create major changes down the line that we can't even begin to see. So I think that's always a great thing to remember. Yeah. I think, Angela, you probably experienced in your time with the Battered Women Support Services how from the beginning you can see changes near the end now, or like today, which I think
incredible.
is
I love it.
Yeah, it's an amazing, amazing thing. The next question here that I have is, could you expand a little bit, or I was asked to ask you, if you could elaborate a little bit on how the police is an extension of a patriarchal society?
Oh, geez. Good question. Such a good question. Amazing questions. I love the questions. So, I mean, if we're talking, I can't speak for all other parts of the world and wouldn't want to. I can talk about Canada, and that the police in Canada were created with the sole point of moving Indigenous people off the land in order for European settlers to come and settle. And then in order to have resource extraction to build what is now the economy in Canada. So the nation state made the decision to have the police be an extension of white male power and economic power. And so the Canada's police forces had a bunch of different names over the years, not a bunch, but a couple. And now they're called the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And then there's municipal police forces, but they all have the same idea of protecting private property, which has always been about the power structure, which has always been male. And so, and even though we have, we see women get jobs in policing now, and it's there's a few, it's like we can trickle up into the hierarchy, but the structure remains very specific. And the structure has always been a male structure, a patriarchal structure to hold the values that have been brought through colonization. And in Canada, that's always been landowner values and male values, because women couldn't own property. And then in terms of women, it was women that were married to white men, or that had a relationship to white men. So the power, police have been explicitly about male power. And though there's women in there, and we can even be the heads of police services, but the structure remains the same, and the system remains the same. And though there's a few of us that maybe want to try and get into the system, to change the system, it's very difficult to change. It's very resistant to change, because it's, I saw on television the other day, a contemporary media person, called the police a policeman. So it's only been like, maybe the last 25 years that there's been even women in policing, and even for that matter, women, they had the role for a long time, in the dresses and the shoes, the skirts. that did like, they did like the parking patrol and had lesser roles within policing. It's always been a patriarchal institution. And so this is something for us to keep in mind in terms of the role of RCMP, the role of policing, and that it is an extension of the power structure. And in Canada, that's a white male power structure.
Yeah, for sure. Of course. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are starting to run out of time. There were a few questions that some of you sent me that I did not have the chance to ask. So right now I do want to ask Angela if they have any other questions for you. What is the best way for them to ask them directly to you?
Yes, so I'm going to give you my coordinates here. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter. So Angela Marie Mac is Twitter, and then Angela Marie 1223 is Instagram, and then my email is director@BWSS.org. Oops.
All right, it's been, oh, sorry. I was say it's been so amazing.
The first is Instagram, and then
perfect, amazing. So make sure you guys write that down if you have any burning questions that you still want to ask. I do want to thank everybody for coming out today and being open to having this discussion about this very, very important topic, especially in the circumstances that we live in right now. I also want to thank Girl Up Edinburgh for being able to give us this platform to talk about this topic. And I want to give her the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the webinar series going on.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I just want to say, wow, this has been incredible. I mean, I've learned so much. I mean, just like writing down everything's just all over the place. I can't wait to put everything that I've learned into practice. So thank you so much to Caitlin for your great moderating. Thank you to Angela for your words of wisdom. And I also just wanted to let you all know that this isn't it. You can continue. There's more to do in your own daily lives, as well as with Girl Up Edinburgh and with the webinar series. So the webinar series is called Exploring COVID-19's Intersectional Impact on Women and Girls Worldwide. So Girl Up clubs across the world, including Girl Up BC, including Girl Up Medellin in Colombia, including Girl Up Buop in Puebla, Mexico earlier today, which some of you guys are here from, which is awesome. We love to see you here. So there are more coming up. We have 3 coming up next week, talking about the impact of COVID-19 on Black and brown girls in New York City, known to the juvenile justice system and to the detention and to the American foster care system, as well as conversations about COVID-19's impact on disadvantaged girls in India, as well as a conversation about women's rights in Israel. So that's all next week, back to back. So head to our Instagram and you'll hear more.
Yeah, last plug is make sure you follow Girl Up Edinburgh as well as Girl Up BC. We'll have more events coming out soon, more information always being posted. And specifically because I do the research, so insightful, so many things to learn. Do a quick Google search on your weekend when you have like 10-15 minutes to spare. There's so much information out there for us to continue this conversation and continue moving forward. So thank you all again for coming out to this webinar and being so attentive and so engaging. It was really amazing to see. And thank you again, Angela, for coming out and sharing your experiences and your knowledge that you have about domestic violence as well as gender-based violence.
Thank you, Caitlin. I had a blast. Thank you everyone for coming out. Amazing questions. Thank you, Sheriff, for just the beautiful opportunity here. This is amazing. Girl Up is so great. Such good grace. Thank you, everyone, for your brilliance and for being here. And I'm looking forward to all that's next, seeing you out in the world. Amazing work, everyone.
I don't know who ends the meeting. I'm not gonna lie. Okay.
I'll end it. Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Bye.